Haderslevhus is the name of a castle that once stood in the Danish city of Haderslev, until destroyed by a fire. History. Like most of the medieval cities of trade, Haderslev had a royal castle, which was called Haderslevhus. The suffix -hus was commonly used for castles in medieval Denmark. The castle was first mentioned in sources dating back to 1326, but it was most likely built in the second half of the 13th century. Like most Danish city castles, these were a home of the governor of the borough, who took care of the king's possessions in and around the city. In the city castle, the taxes, duties, and fines were paid. Haderslevhus was located in the eastern part of the city, which was surrounded by a moat at the time. In this fortification lived the Danish king Christian III when he imposed the Reformation in Haderslev. In 1526, when Hans the Elder was proclaimed Duke of Schleswig and Holstein, he took up residence in Haderslevhus, which now, in 1544, was an old and worn-out building. After a few years, the Duke decided to build a new castle, called Hansberger. It was supposed to be a new and modern Renaissance palace that suited him much better. As chief architect, he appointed Hercules von Oberberg, one of the most influential architects of the time. The western wing of the building was ready for use in 1562 and the Duke moved in. 4 years later, in 1566, the southern wing with the chapel was completed. After the completion of Hansborg, the old building was demolished, and the area on which it stood for centuries was sold in bits to the staff of the new palace. A small part of the castle is preserved to this day. In the 1570s, Duke Hans started to build the eastern and northern wings of Hansborg, but he died in 1580, and therefore did not see the completed castle. After the Duke died, the Danish King Frederick II acquired parts of his lands, including Haderslev, and in 1580 to 1585 he finished the construction of the last 2 wings. The palace now stood as a whole, complete with 4 wings and 2 towers at the corners. In the area between the castle and the city, one could find stables, economic buildings, and residences for parts of the palace staff. The palace itself spanned over a 80 by 75 meters piece of ground, about the size of Kronborg, and a bit bigger than Sonderborg Castle. Shortly after the completion of Hansborg, it was decided that the castle should be called by the original name, Haderslevhus, presumably to follow the old systematic naming of castles in trade cities at the time. So, actually, the castle was only called Hansborg in the short period of time between 1562 and about 1590. Otherwise, the castles has always been spoken of by the name Haderslevhus. The German imperial troops used the castle as headquarters in 1627 to 1629, and the building was severely damaged. In 1629 to 1642 a lot of reconstruction took place, but the castle was invaded by Torstensson's troops in 1643 to 1645, and in 1644, the castle caught fire and burned to the ground. After this catastrophe, many of the bricks was used for the construction of the Danish Royal Library, and therefore a castle was never rebuilt. Haderslev had lost both of its castles.